Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Christine Fauner. I am bringing you amazing stories from amazing women in leadership from across the globe. Let's get started. Well, I'm here today to introduce you to B. Elizabeth Beck. She's coming to us from Lexington, Kentucky, and she's a poet who writes fiction. Her fifth collection of poetry, Dancing on the Page, will be published by Rabbit House Press this year in 2024. She also has a debut collection of short stories coming out that will be published by Accents Publishing this year, too. For those of you who may have heard of Miss Beck already, or you're a Phish fan and you've heard of her, she's also the author of the Summer Tour Trilogy, which is how I got to know this amazing woman initially. Listen, she's layered, she's inspirational, and what I love most is that she writes and continues to guide others in learning their own voice through poetry and writing. Elizabeth, thank you for being here. I also know that you're the founder of two poetry series, Teen Howl and Poetry at the Table in Lexington, Kentucky, which we're going to talk to in a minute as well. But I really wanted to start with introducing you to everybody really in the way that I got to know you, which is you started being known. Can we start there? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christine. That's very nice to hear that I'm known. I love that. Unexpected for a poet to be known.
I guess it's always like the dead ones, right? Dead Poet Society kind of things, but you're quite alive and you are getting known. And so I just love to start with, how we know you. I met you through the Summer Tour Trilogy, which is really your journey through trauma and healing in your own story, using your love of music and really that Phish experience that so many of us know. If you don't know about Phish, it's a band. So I'd love for you to just start there.
Absolutely. I wrote the first draft of Summer Tour of Summer Tour, the first novel of the trilogy, I think about 10 years ago. And I'll be honest, I was taking some postgraduate level classes in order to renew my certification for teaching, because it was time for me to return to the classroom. My teacher was Gurney Norman, who's the author of Divine Right's Trip. And he was part of the Fab Five, which were Kentucky writers who went out to Palo Alto, California in the 1960s. And through my experience in studying with Gurney, I wrote the first draft of Summer Tour. And at the time, I wrote it for my son, who was about 12 years old, a very intelligent kid, but hated reading. So I purposely made my protagonist a young man named Sam, who is 17 years old. The cool thing about Sam is he's never heard of the band Phish. He's not familiar with the genre, the music, the culture that goes around it at all when he is suddenly pulled out of boarding school by his father and placed into the Calico House for the summer with his Aunt Karen. And there he meets a group of friends who welcome him and invite him to go along on what was 2019 Phish Tour, Summer Tour.
I was on that tour.
And yes, and it's set authentically on Summer Tour of 2019 with the set lists included. But it is a piece of fiction. And the story, is not just about a bunch of hippies running around getting crazy. It's really about how Sam reconciles the grief that he has from losing his mother through connecting with this community and connecting with the music in a deeply personal, spiritual way, which is kind of a common experience many of us have found as we've been led in different ways in different times to Phish. I started to see Phish in 1992 after what they call jumping on the bus with the Grateful Dead in
Yeah.
1986. So I did draw upon my own personal experiences in order to create that story. So, okay, so I write the first draft with Gurney. He loves it. I put it in a drawer, the proverbial drawer, and went back to teaching. In 2019, my son graduated from high school, and I
Yeah.
knew that I needed a big project because I was suffering from the empty nest. Even though I was still teaching at the time, I knew I needed a big project. So I unearthed the manuscript and started revising and writing, which took another year.
Yeah.
Then the pandemic hit in 2020. At that time, Christine, I was writing to literary agents, submitting. And what we writers do is we write what's called a query letter, and we submit to an agent. If the agent then likes your work and picks you up, then they have to shop it around. And, it can take several years. And I was vested at that time. I had published a couple collections of poetry and kind of had a feel for the literary world. But when the pandemic hit and all of the shows, all of the festivals, everything, the whole world shut down, here I was sitting with this book about kids on Phish Tour of the previous summer. And I really kind of took a deep breath and did something kind of risky. I self-published it. I went through Kindle Direct Publishing and I hit enter. And lo and behold, it was a huge hit. And to my absolute delight, it was a huge hit.
I want to stop there for a moment because I talk about this a lot in leadership or in self-discovery towards owning your space. And what I find really interesting is that you decided to self-publish, and I feel like that authenticity in the story hit. I feel like people know when that hits and they resonate with that and they're craving that and seeking that. So it's really interesting to me that this moment of taking the jump and going, I'm not going to go traditional route. I'm going to go publish now. It's going to go be available now. And it
Right.
resonated at a time
It
that people may have really needed it.
And I really appreciate that because I actually was bowled over by the response. So many people reached out to me and shared with me their stories, things that they had gone through that were similar to what Sam had gone through, losses in their life that were similar. And they thanked me for creating that scenario. And there are many of us who seek out the progressive rock scene, the jam band scene for healing purposes. A lot of people, and that's what my new book, Dancing on the Page, is really about my spiritual journey of healing from my own trauma in life through connecting with live music. And it's something very magical, and it can really heal in ways that, traditional therapy, which I do and have done for years, group therapy, all of these other things, very, very important. But for some people, when we are able to connect with the music and, it's that symbiotic relationship with the band on the stage to the audience, and be a very powerful and very moving experience that I'm drawn to personally. So the idea that I was able to share that, and it was really kind of cool. Some of the folks who picked up my book because they liked my poems or they were parents of my students, they'd never heard of the band Phish. And so that was kind of exciting because I feel like I was introducing an audience to something that I'm very passionate about and that I care about very, very much.
I love that you talk about that interconnectivity between the artists, the musicians themselves and their music, their relationship with the audience, and then our relationship together. It is very transcendent. I'm wondering how that works on a personal level for you between your writing, your experiences, and your love of music.
Well, I think the whole concept of call and response is a very powerful experience that humans have been using. About 20 years ago, I started practicing djembe drumming and learning West African rhythms and really understanding what I was doing as an 18, 19, 20-year-old with the Grateful Dead was almost a language that was created all the way back to the Paleolithic, Neolithic time period. And when we understand that concept of call and response, there's a lot of power in it. And it's not just the response component. It is unique, though. I will say Phish is so unique that they use it so effectively because we honestly do feel involved with what's going on the stage versus being a spectator to it. And that comes from the long tradition of the Grateful Dead.
Right.
When the whole concept of jumping on tour and traveling from city to city to city, and the Grateful Dead being known for having their little carnival that goes with them. Well, it's a little bit more than just a carnival. It's an absolute community, a spiritual community, an emotional community. I have met some of my closest, dearest friends through the music universe. And I think it's remarkable that even before the advent of the internet and this connectedness and this technology,
there's a commonality and an understanding of the transcendence of the experience of being in a musical place that is healing. And not every band can do that, but you're right. This one does. Grateful Dead did. Others do. I love that that was the motivator or kind of the inspiration for being able to tell a story through that.
And then Under the Elm, the last book of the trilogy, actually operates as a prequel. So I flash back to 1979 and I tell the story of how the Calico House came to be, how Aunt Karen and Maggie transitioned from being born and raised on a commune, traveling with the Grateful Dead, to, where they ended up. And I was very purposeful in choosing to go down that rabbit hole, if you will, but I was smart, unintentionally smart. Aunt Karen in Summer Tour, I made her exactly my age. So when I flashed back to 1979 and Aunt Karen was 11 years old, I was 11 years old in 1979. So then once again, I was able to use my own life experiences, being in the sixth grade and roller skating parties and, the girls skate and you went by and you slapped all the boys' hands, little things like that. These little details. What do they say? The more the rule of poetry, and then I use that in fiction, is the more specific the detail, the more universally connected it becomes, which is very oxymoronic,
Counterintuitive, but
it
it's
works.
right.
It's true. If I tell you I ate lunch, it's no big deal. If I tell you that I indulged in @ṭā-bəl, and had extra mild sauce, all of a sudden you're tasting Taco Bell. If I look back at the body of work that I've created, I do try to stand as a leader. I am a survivor of an abusive, traumatic childhood. And I promised myself if I ever made it out, that I would turn around and help as many kids as I could. So I did that first as a social worker, then as a teacher, and now as a writer. So all of my books at the core are about overcoming trauma. And regardless of whether you've experienced my type of trauma or a different type of trauma, the human responses to that are similar, right? So when we talk about the trigger responses, there's fear, fight, flee, freeze, fawn. Those are universal responses regardless of what that triggering trauma is. So, and I've also always woven music into all of my books, from the very, very first book, which, relied heavily on the music I was listening to as a child, the Beatles. There's a lot of Beatles lyrics in there. And then it goes in through where I connected with the Grateful Dead and where I connected with Phish. And I've been pretty purposeful. Now, I have to tell you, the traditional literary world sometimes doesn't quite know what to do with all of that, because they're not familiar with our scene. But I'm really excited about Swan Songs because it's a collection of stories, and I expanded beyond the jam band or progressive rock scene. So I chose different musicians to somehow weave thematically within the stories, spanning to include the Rolling Stones, Tina Turner, Carly Simon, Thelonious Monk, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker. Any of the music that I really enjoy and listen to, I go ahead and just, kind of thread that through, like writing Under the Elm, flashing back to 1979. I think my Spotify thing said, Supertramp was my favorite band for the year. I promise you, Supertramp is not my favorite band, but wow, nothing will take me back faster to 1979 than listening to Take the Long Way Home, right? Yeah, I mean, there's just something about that groove, right? And then how about this? The Brothers Johnson, the Strawberry Letter 23 came out in 1979. So I was able to use the actual references to Strawberry Letter 23. And I have to tell you, the first time Trey put it in their lexicon and I heard it, I was like, ah, and you're like, how do you know this song? Well, you knew it from junior high school. I mean, if you're a 1.0 or like me.
Yeah. I'm curious. I want to know a little bit more about your poetry groups that you run, because I think that
Right.
fits right into your promise to yourself that if you were to survive and thrive out of trauma yourself, you would go and give to the people that also are going through experiences. So I would
Absolutely.
love to see and hear how some of those groups have been a way for you to connect with others.
Excellent. Thank you. Um, both of the groups are a monthly poetry series. So the Teen Howl poetry series, Howl from Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl, began in 2011 here in Lexington, Kentucky at our only independent bookstore called Morris Books. And my poetry partner, Jay McCoy, and I thought at the time there was a monthly poetry series going on at a bar for the grown-ups, and there wasn't anything in town for the kids. So we thought, why not try? Let's just see. And I got to tell you, at first we had no idea who would show up, if anybody would show up, what would happen. So we literally broke down Ginsberg's poem, Howl, into sections, and we're ready to read sections of them if we couldn't fill the open mic. Well, we could never have anticipated the response we got from these children. They showed up. Now, the key to the success for Teen Howl is not so much that we have an open mic for kids. There's two components that make it really unique. One is we always tap a teen feature, and we give them a feature where they get a flyer, a poster with their picture on it, and they get an extended set. They can read for 15, 20 minutes versus just one poem at the mic. And the growth when we tap a kid and then we see what happens with their poetry in the next few months is exponential. It's just extraordinary. The second thing we did that was unique was because Jay and I are local poets, because we both teach at the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, we know adult poets. So we invited adult features every month so that the kids could start learning about the professional poets that are in our region, and then the adults too could have an opportunity to see our kids because they're brilliant. Our kids are just so smart. They're so smart. And we've been lucky enough in 2013, we had Ada Limon, who is currently the Poet Laureate of the United States, grace our stage as a feature. We had Crystal Wilkinson, who has a huge book out now and was Poet Laureate of Kentucky. We've had really, really big names come to Teen Howl. So we did that for 5 years, 60 months consecutively, the first Thursday of the month. Well, the bookstore went under and the pandemic hit. Teen Howl 2.0 has started now at 3rd Street Stuff and Coffee, which we love. Pat Gerhardt is the owner and artist. It's a welcoming, beautiful, safe space for kids. But here's the cool part, Christine. Jay and I are no longer the face of Teen Howl. Jessica Taylor and Hunter Nelson, who were our 17-year-old kids. Hunter used to come up in his skateboard, smoking cigarettes, little poet brat, whatever. Well, they're almost 30 now. And so for the last 2 years, Hunter and Jessica are the face of Teen Howl. They MC it. They run the social media. We're on Instagram now. These kids got it going on. And Jay and I are like the proud mama and papa in the back just cheering because what we're watching is children mentoring children. And I don't know about you, but when I was 27 years old, nobody was handing me a whole program to run. So it was an absolute honor for us to guide and mentor Hunter and Jessica in order to take over and run Teen Howl.
This segues really nicely into this concept of what leadership is. One of the surprises of this podcast for me has been really redefining what leadership is to the common public, right? Like to us,
Yes.
what does leadership really mean? And I think about it in terms of impact and influence. And one of the first questions I always ask leaders in my coaching practice is, what's your succession plan? And succession planning isn't about retiring. It's
Mm,
not about when
hmm
I leave. Succession planning is, how well does this operate and how well can this grow without me? Because I've brought people up with me.
Yes, and
And
it's
that's what
so
I hear.
important.
That's what I hear.
The writer's world is a very lonely world because, quite frankly, in order to get the words out of your brain onto the page, you have to spend an enormous amount of time alone. So opportunities to build community, are really, really important to writers. Attending writing conferences, participating in book fairs and book festivals. It's probably been like the greatest surprise and joy for me because I have been able to be mentored and led by people I really respect and admire. And when I say mentor, it doesn't always have to be age per se. For example, my publisher of Accents Publishing is a couple years, physically couple years younger than me, but I call her my owl. She's wise. I've taken classes from her. I learned from her, and those kind of relationships I think are so important. Well, when I first wrote Summer Tour, I had song lyrics as, the
Mhm.
epigraphs of the chapters, and then I would have characters like actually quote songs. And I was lucky enough that I have a writer friend who messaged me and said, "Hey, sis, this is copyright violation. I mean, I don't think Phish is going to come after you, but do you really want to go down that road?" I almost had a heart attack.
Right.
Last thing I want to do is this is my love letter to Fish. I kind of joke around and say, but it's not a joke. 300,000 words still weren't enough to express my love and gratitude and appreciation for how this band has served my life. So I was very, very careful, and now I know the members of the band. Some of them have the book in their hands now. So if I was in any trouble, I'd know about it, and
I
I
love that you
needed
took
to
the
make
time to
sure.
get it right so that, we could hear the story and also have that connection to the music. It's really cool. Speaking of recommendations of books and love letters, any other works of art that you'd like to share with us beyond what we've talked about today?
Well, I'm waiting with bated breath to get my hands on the new Ada Limon collection of poetry. The Carrying was, a huge, huge influence on my writing and someone that I study. I really studied Michael Zadorian, who writes effectively about the Detroit music scene, and enjoyed really getting to know his work. I could go on and on about poets forever, though. I think, I spend a lot of time with poets. I do read a lot of fiction. I happen to love Alice Hoffman is one of my favorite writers, and I'm still an old school book reader. I still like
I love a
paper,
paper book. I
yeah,
still
instead
use
of
the paper
Kindle.
books.
Well,
I'm
I
surrounded by books.
and
You
I
don't see it right
carry
now.
I
I'm
carry the Lincoln
surrounded.
Highway. Why? Why? I mean, it was so stupid in a way, like, because it's just such a big book. But it was just one of those books where I just kept throwing my hands up. Now, I am going to turn you on to a Kentucky writer who isn't that well known. Her name is Jan LaPearl. And
I love the title. For those of you listening, the title is Maybe the Land Sings
Sings
Back.
Back. It's her second collection. And I am just absolutely blown away. Another poet that I really would like to promote and for you guys to keep an eye out is my dear friend Makalani Bendelli from Louisville, Kentucky. He's an Appalachian poet.
Thank you so much. For those of you that have not heard this podcast before, please know that we always put the links to recommendations and links to get to know the podcast guests more in the description of the podcast. So make sure to head over there and click, click, click. I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for sharing
Thank
your story
you.
with us.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks for joining us today in the Executives Lounge, where we bust open the doors, slam through the ceilings, and make sure that we have a spot at the table and that we are the lounge. You can find more podcast recordings and episodes at www.roamyoursoul.com. That's ROAM, roaming the world, finding amazing stories from amazing women, sharing their leadership skills and talents with us all over the globe.